What is up, Bookman fam? Welcome back to the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a new bed frame. My mattress is no longer seated on the floor. It's about, you know, 6 or 7 feet off the ground. Uh, Things are looking up in life. I recently went on a walk outside. So let's take this opportunity to talk about an absolutely depressing book, one of the most saddest books in literature, and it's nonfiction, unfortunately. Today we'll be talking about The End of Eddy by Edouard Louis. And like mentioned in the intro, this book is memoir. It is, well, I'm not sure if it is established whether or not it is memoir, but it is known that the author, if it is not a one for one retelling or a recount of his life, is heavily influenced by his life. This was a book recommended to me from a friend, and he's a well read, pretty worldly guy. So I thought, let me check out what this square is talking about. See what kind of books he's reading. And yeah, so I picked up The End of Eddy by Edouard Louis, he is a French writer. And this story takes place in a sort of low socioeconomic, more poor and rural region of France. And yeah, so let's get into it. New intro. Put down in the comment section what y'all thought of the intro. I mean, I spent a lot of time making it, so you know, only positive comments, nothing negative, please. Uh, but let's start with settings, since we already sort of talked about it a little bit. So the End of Eddy takes place in a poor rural region of France, and as we're reading this book, and Eddy is recounting his life growing up in this area of France, it honestly reminded me of the area I grew up in Appalachia, in America. And so that was a neat sort of text to world connection that I was able to make while reading this book. Was like, hey, like, you know, the things and the way the people acted, the things he had to deal with, that's similar things that I saw happening, where I grew up. And the sort of ideologies that a lot of the people have was also very similar. For example, uh, a large majority of the men growing up in this small rural town go on to do the minimal requirement of education necessary, and then they go and work in the factory. And very few of them will go on to go to higher education or like I don't know, more higher white collar level positions. And Eddy talks about this in the book, how the teacher's kid or maybe the local physician's kid may go on to do something like that. But the idea of college seems kind of foreign for Eddy because just the whole idea seems kind of outlandish, right? Like that's something reserved for like the middle class kind of people in our area. And Eddy, unfortunately, was born into a household that struggled to provide means and keep the money flowing. Um, and I saw that sort of related to how a lot of people that grew up in my area would go on to work in the coal mines. Maybe not so much now, as the sort of coal mine industry has definitely tapered off from where it used to be. Uh, but yeah, I would imagine 20, 30, 40 years ago in West Virginia, that was probably a big thing. A lot of kids go to school. Oh, there's my cat. Hello. Uh, is that an animal? Should I cut that out? But yeah, so a lot of people that I grew up with, they will go into these sort of, they'll do the minimal education required, get the GED, and work in the fields of like construction or work in the coal mines. And not there's anything wrong with that, of course. Like these are like jobs that we need, and we should respect someone who is operating a an excavator the same as we praise someone trying to sell you some product you don't need. Yeah. But I'm getting a little bit on a tangent here. Yeah, basically what I'm saying here is the setting. I saw a lot of relationship to sort of how I grew up, and we'll go further into that especially when we get to see how Eddy is treated for being different than the norm in his society. But yeah, setting interesting, and Lewis, he does a great job of painting that picture for you of what it was like. Because while I'm reading this, I'm like, wow, like that's like it just feels like I was transported back to that time in my life when I was a kid growing up in poor rural area of America. The way he like sort of describes the landscape, or how the people, what are they doing, what do they find joy in. It was just like, wow, he does a very um does a very great job of painting that picture for you, what it would be like to grow up in those conditions in that kind of area. So this story, for the most part, is told in chronological order, with the exception of there is one flashback in the story where we jump over a major event in Eddy's life, and then we come back to it later in the story to sort of have this sort of great revelation moment. Um, Told in chronological order, uh, Edouard Louis, he is very academic with his writing. It feels very clean. Uh, he uses the semicolon, the colons. Uh, it just feels very academic, very clean, like I just said twice. Um, but yeah, I enjoyed the writing. There was some instances where I'd have to look a word up or two because I was like, wow, that's a pretty delicious word. I've never heard that word before. But yeah, and the framing of the story is pretty digestible, easy to come to, right? Because he is telling it from point A to point B, right? But let's get into like the actual meat of the story. What's happening here in Eddy's life, and what makes this story so like gripping and harrowing to read about. And if you couldn't derive what the title may mean to the story, the end of Eddy is basically, Edouard Louis. That's not. I don't think that's his birthright name. He has a different name. It's Edouard something else. He has a different last name. But this book is telling the end of Eddy. So we have this completed character arc of Eddy in his childhood, and where that sort of ends. Right by the end of the book, he's no longer, Eddy, the kid who grew up in the poor town with the father with the broken back and the super aggressive, angry brother, and uh, he becomes he is sort of put on a trajectory. And he is a new person by the end of this book. So that's why it's called the end of Eddy. But let's talk about this journey. What happens to Eddy? What makes him sort of in this character arc? And move on to the next one. Uh, well, see, Edouard knew from a young age that he was different from the other kids in his community because he is a gay man, and especially growing up in a rural area with some, backward thinking on things. Uh, this made him sort of an outcast. It was something he had to hide. But most importantly, he reflected a lot on himself. He saw it as some sort of curse or disease that he had to get rid of, right? Because that was the notion that was put out by the people that he lived around. And that's a great thing about the setting here too. Is it's just so the setting is so deeply ingrained in the story, right? You'll get your fiction stories with Middle Earth, or well, that's probably a bad example because it's but you get the setting, and it plays a minor role in the features of the story. But it's like this story, the setting is just, it's almost its own character, right? The setting is a character of the book, like Middle Earth, like other famous settings. uh this poor this poor area of France is almost a character in of itself in the story because it has so much implications, so many uh it affects Eddy's life in so many ways, because you take this kid and you put him in a different area and he has a completely different childhood, right? But Eddy is in a very backward area of the country, and it's not even with the homophobia. There's a lot of racism as well. We see that through the father character, right? Who him and his buddies, and most of the people in the community talk about, they talk very negatively and poorly about African some of the African nations, and this could be a result of a war. I think that France sort of doing a little bit of colonizing in Africa, or they try to at least. And so you have the homophobia, the racism, the very backward thinking of the people here, and so you get a kid like Eddy, who is a gay kid, and he is put in an almost like insurmountable position to try to come out of without being hurt in some way, and he does his best to hide it, to change himself. Uh, but his sort of Eddy's fight with himself uh, to get to the point where he can end Eddy and become a more accepting version of who he is by the end of the book, or elevate himself to get out of the situation that has harmed him for so long. That is really the main hinge of this book. Here's what happened to Eddy. This is what he had to do to get out of here. And other than the character arc of Eddy, it's also a commentary on just growing up in rural areas, in more poverty-stricken places. How they function and how there's issues there that need to be addressed. Let's take this section. Sort of talk about the major players in this game. We have Eddy, who is sort of going through this arc of sort of an internal tug of war with himself, right? Trying to uh, fight who he is, how he genuinely feels, and he is our main character of the story. We also have the father, Eddy's father, who is the prototype of the average male in this sort of poverty rural area of France, and this is a character I've seen a lot. It's we get this super hyper masculinity that a lot of these men are obsessed with, right? In this community, being a tough guy meant everything. Part of the reason Eddy was named Eddy with his original birth last name was because it sounded like a tough guy name, and his father swore that he wanted him to be a tough guy. You know, and so this community is sort of very centered around the idea of being the your run of the mill masculine hero, the tough guy, doesn't take anything, gets what he wants, doesn't accept no as an answer, and the father very much is our window into that culture. And the father, what's interesting about him is you get moments. He's a very tragically terrible character. I mean, he's detestable, but it's a little bit. The reason I put the word tragedy in there is he has glimmers and he has moments where you see that there is a side to him that is accepting. Uh, very about 3/4 into the book, we get a story from Eddy's mother talking about how Eddy's father used to live in southern France, or he moved somewhere else in France, in a more like metropolitan area, and he was a roommate with a African person, and they were good friends. And now that he comes back, this is why his mother talks about how appalled she is by his like overt racism, because he was best friends with this African man when they lived in the southern France together before he moved back home. And it's not even with the racism. We see also there's a moment in this book where this is a time where Eddy's father has sort of, come to terms with, of course, but he has sort of realized that his son probably is gay. And he sees a gay couple, the father. And of course, Eddy is there too because he's recalling this to us, what happened. But Eddy's father witnesses two gay men dancing at a sort of like party bar type of situation. Um, and these sort of young guys in the town, obsessed with the masculine ideal of being a tough guy, walk up to the gay couple, and they're sort of like, heckling them, like, oh, saying, you know, homophobic remarks and stuff. And the dad actually steps in and takes up for the gay couple. He says, "Leave them alone. Y'all need to just scram, get away." And it's moments like these where you almost see a little bit of hope in the father character, but ultimately the system that he's been raised in, and the influence of his society has been so heavy on him. It's hard for him to break through and really achieve some sort of like transformative change in himself. But we get those moments, and it gives us hope. But we ultimately realize the father, probably is not, going to be who we wish he would be for Eddy. Although we do understand the father cares for Eddy, of course. We get a scene where Eddy says he's going to run away from the house. He's running away, and his dad catches him down, and he roughs him up. He's like, "Come on, come home. What are you doing? You're an idiot." And then we get a scene where the father sits with Eddy before bed, and he just cries. He lets his son know how much he loves him, and it scares him that he would think to do such a thing. So yeah, father, tragically complex character. I would say another feature character besides Eddy and the father would be Eddy's mother. And she takes up a good portion of the screen time or the page time in this book, and she's our window into the woman's life in the rural poverty, areas of France, or just poverty in general. And we get to see she is also someone trying to struggle with this sort of predetermined fate that she's been given, right? We understand the mother had dreams of being more than just, a house servant for the father, or just cleaning up around the house and doing, cleaning tasks for other people. And slowly, uh, she is, despite trying to fight against, that wall that has been built, uh, you know, socially. Uh, she's regulated to the position that most women have in these areas, which is either, shopkeeper jobs, or things of that sort. Um, and one example of this would be when the mother took a job and she was actually making more than the father because the father had an injury that prevented him from working. The father uh, was adamant that she quit her job because it looked bad that she was making more money than him. And I think that whole scenario right there perfectly sort of lays out how the woman functions in these types of areas, right? And we get to see more instances of this through her dialogue with Eddy. She talks about how she had these big plans and how she wanted to do these things, but then I had kids and things got out of hand and I never got back to it. Um, but where the father is our window into the overt masculine ideology, we get to see the woman's role in the society as well through the mother, which is one sort of like I mentioned earlier, relegated to a more traditional, um, conservative view on the role of a woman, which is to take care of the kids and clean and not really outperform or be the breadwinner. And while maybe the father has a sad story because he also had a worse father, um, it may still be hard to root for him considering how he acts. And the mother as well, we understand her situation, but she also, may be hard to be completely sympathetic with her. We have the character of Eddy, our main character, and he is the victim of the true travesties and the real vile things that can come with growing up in an area like this. Uh, Eddy is bullied pretty terribly, I would say. And we get the multiple recountings of the scene where he's in the school hallway, by the library during recess, and he's just hiding. He's hiding from people, not because he doesn't want to be seen, but he doesn't want to be seen uh, getting beaten up by his two bullies who would come and they would beat him up and physically harm him on a regular occasion for the fact that they had assumed, or they had the notion that he may have been gay at that age. And it's not only the kids, his peers, that do this to him, but it's also uh, the adults. And while adults that aren't his parents may not directly affect him, indirectly through their pressure on the mother and father, they have a negative impact on Eddy as well. Because the father has to hold up to the standard that his son is a tough guy and not a gay kid. And so his father sort of projects this negative energy he's getting onto his son to try to fix him, right? To make him fall in line with the traditional values. So, you know, they seem like a regular family. And this honestly affects Eddy because he especially at a young age, you're impressionable. You think that what your parents tell you is the complete truth, right? He thinks there's something wrong with him that he needs to change, and we get these sort of scenes throughout the book where Eddy is put in situations where he either embraces the sexuality that he has felt since a young age, or he tries to rebel. We see Eddy tries to get numerous girlfriends, but when he tries to, make love to them or perform any sort of intimate acts with them, he's incapable of doing it because he just doesn't feel that attraction to them that he does to males. And we get scenes where he rejects it with males. So then we also get scenes where he embraces it, and it's just this very very sad, harrowing battle that he has with himself. You know, trying to accept himself when everyone else is sort of painting him as this sort of outcast and monster. And we get one scene where I'm just, I don't want this to get banned on YouTube, so I'm just going to refer to it as the shed scene. If you've read this book, you know the shed scene. But basically, the shed scene, it is the scene in the book that is, you could say, maybe not the climax, but it's like the highest on the plot diagram or whatever the, who they named it after. I can't remember that guy's name, but it's the scene that we come back to because it gives a lot of context for how the parents acted with Eddy in this book. Basically, the shed scene is a scene where it is revealed that Eddy is, is a gay kid, and yeah, that scene was just wow. I don't want to spoil anything because you have to read the book. But it's a very crazy scene. But it is sad on the parents' behalf because not it's sad for Eddy because the parents, you see them super involved with Eddy's sexuality or him appearing to be a tough kid or straight or whatever. Um, but then there's other areas where you wish they were more active and they seem absent. They rarely ask Eddy about his day. There's a scene where he near the end where he gets the bid to go to work the theater play or whatever, and his dad like says to shut up or something. I mean, his father like would make him walk home from his theater plays because he wouldn't want to go pick him up. It is truly sad how his parents were like active in all the worst places. Um, and just overall, Eddy had a very, very depressing childhood. Another discourse that I was reading online about this book that I wanted to mention here because I thought it was really interesting is how Eddy describes the nature in the not wilderness, but the physical environment around him growing up. And it sort of feels like it in itself is also something that's sort of hammering down, depressing him. He doesn't describe any scene or landscape beautifully. It's always the verbiage that he uses is always words with negative connotations, and it gives you this feeling that even the nature around him, the trees themselves, are sort of suffocating him in this sort of negative echo chamber that he's been sort of shoved into, because he was born there. And I thought that was interesting. So even he can't even get the escape in nature either. That's also something that's oppressing him. And amidst all of this depression and despair, we get glimmers of hope before the epilogue. Eddy gets the bid to go to a higher end school for the arts. So instead of the local high school that most kids go to, where his two bullies would inevitably go to, where the whole entire uh, his whole entire age range of kids, all of his peers who uh, understand that he was gay and held it against him, would go to. He gets the idea to get out of that situation. He is given, you could say the golden ticket to get out of this area and go to the city and go to a school for the arts, for theater, singing, songwriting, stuff like that, writing stage plays. And that gives us hope, right? Because well, first he has the audition, and then we realize that he successfully gets a spot. He gets a scholarship to go to the school, and he moves into the dormitory, and we sort of before the epilogue, we get a hopeful note. Like, well, now Eddy is he's out of the jail that he was born in. And then we get the epilogue. We soon realize that Eddy has entered another sphere where he's an outcast. Yes, they may be more accepting of his sexuality, but now he's surrounded by people who have grown up wealthy. Uh, he is now outcasted for his, lack of wealth. He can't relate or fit in with any of the kids at this theater school because he had such a drastically different childhood. He grew up with, or they grew up with luxuries that he did not have. And now, once again, he has entered a realm where he struggles to fit in. And that's the note that this book ends. I know that sounds terribly depressing. I mean, the last book we read was also sad, A Farewell to Arms. Maybe the next read will be a hopeful one. I don't know. The book I'm reading right now that I plan to review next has a very depressing premise. So maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the problem. I don't know. But there's one quote from this book I'd like to end this review with because I thought it was really powerful. Edouard Louis has a lot of commentaries that he makes on the human condition that are very interesting. But this one I wanted to quote before we ended the video. And he said that pride is the first manifestation of shame. And that's something I had to sit with for a little bit to think about. And then I realized, you know, how correct this statement was. I remember I was taking a writing class in university, and one of my professors said that self-hatred, self-loathing, and immense pride, immense self-love aren't that far apart. They're more connected than you think, right? Because if you have this, if you emphasize yourself enough to believe that you deserve hate towards yourself, then inertly you must think that there is an extensive level of value to your existence, right? So it's sort of like two sides of the same coin. If you have a bunch of self-loathing and you resent yourself, then you also have the capability to love yourself and have a large ego, right? And I think this is what this quote is trying to say, right? He says in the book, as if pride is not the first manifestation of shame. And man, that just, I think it does a great job of saying what the major issue with this rural area, poverty stricken area is. It's pride. It's this pride that people have in this sort of fake currency of masculinity and being a tough guy, but really it's a way to sort of hide what you're afraid of, you know, and, and shame, like he said. It's to feel prideful in yourself is the first step to feeling intense shame for yourself. And they talk about this a lot. Eastern philosophy, that's where it differs from Western philosophy, is there isn't as much emphasis on the self. I remember reading Tao Te Ching, and the philosopher tells us, we should be like water. We just move with the current of life, move with the current of time. We are a spoke in the wheel, the great wheel that's moving. Wheel of Time reference. I had to drop one in here, but we get this sort of shift in Western philosophy where the self, the ego, is emphasized. It's something that is important. That everyone has this sort of born right to do what they can to reach above, to do great things. And I think that is also deeply ingrained. France being in the Western Hemisphere. No, it's not. I don't know. It's influenced by Western philosophy more than Eastern philosophy, I would say. And it's just it's this intense value that comes with the self, right? Because if you put a lot of stock in yourself, it can go up, it can go down. But the fact that you're putting that stock in yourself in the first place, you know what I'm saying? That's where the problem lies. That will conclude the review today, everyone. Thank you for watching. the video, The End of Eddy. Who would I recommend this book to? If you're someone who's interested in like I don't know, uh, like sociology maybe, like or anthropology even, sort of just like the how humans function in sort of certain echo chambers or things along those lines. I think this will be it's is honestly, honest to God, I would say if you want to understand what it is like to grow up in a poor rural area, read this book because it does a great job of explaining all the fine nuances and details that come with growing up in such an area. Just speaking from experience, it is very incredibly sad though, and it's a short read, so you can get through it pretty quick. I think it's only like, let me see, like not even 200 pages. It's 191. So. But thank you all for watching, and tune in for the next video. Like, comment, and subscribe.